I'd always been ambitious. From the moment I landed my first internship, I had a singular focus: climb the ladder, prove myself, and carve out a career that meant something. At 26, working as a marketing strategist at Carter Enterprises, I felt I'd finally found my groove. My days were long but rewarding, filled with campaigns, creative meetings, and endless cups of coffee. I'd built a solid reputation: dependable, resourceful, professional. But there was one complication that I carefully tucked away, hidden behind polite smiles and carefully measured words. My boss, Mr. Carter. James Carter, was everything you'd expect a successful CEO to be: charismatic, sharply dressed, and frighteningly intelligent. At 35, he'd built an empire, and his very presence was magnetic. Whenever he entered a room, the air seemed to shift, attention naturally gravitating toward him. I wasn't immune. Despite my best attempts at professionalism, my pulse quickened whenever our eyes met, or he casually brushed past me in a crowded hallway. But I buried those feelings deep, refusing to jeopardize the career I'd worked so hard to build. One Friday evening, just as I was packing up to leave, my phone vibrated. I glanced down, seeing the message notification: James Carter. My stomach tightened slightly, anticipation battling apprehension. "Hey, hope I'm not interrupting your evening plans. Could you swing by my place tomorrow night? I have something confidential I'd like your thoughts on. Dinner included." I read the message twice, my pulse accelerating. My immediate reaction was surprise. Mr. Carter never blurred personal and professional lines. It was one of his defining characteristics. But his message was casual, friendly. An invitation, yet somehow still strictly business. Wasn't it? I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. My thoughts raced. Confidential project. It wasn't unusual to be entrusted with sensitive information, but at his home? Alone? The idea felt dangerously intimate, stirring the emotions I'd worked so hard to suppress. I exhaled sharply, mentally scolding myself. Keep it professional. He trusts your opinion. Don't read more into it. My mind flashed through possible replies. Rejecting the offer felt rude and ungrateful, while acceptance carried its own risks. Still, declining wasn't really an option, not when the man who signed my paychecks needed me. I typed out a careful, polite reply. "Sounds great, Mr. Carter. Thanks for inviting me. I'll see you tomorrow." He responded almost immediately. "Glad you can make it, Adam. Call me James when you get here. See you at 7. My heart jolted at the casual intimacy of his message. Call him James? In the 2 years I'd worked under him, not once had I crossed that particular line. He was always Mr. Carter, distant, professional, untouchable. Suddenly, tomorrow night felt charged with uncertainty and something else. Excitement, perhaps, that I desperately tried to ignore. The next 24 hours dragged painfully, every thought overshadowed by the upcoming meeting. I agonized over what to wear. Formal seemed too stiff, casual too inappropriate. Finally, I settled on something safely in between: a fitted navy shirt and dark jeans, professional enough but subtly flattering. I mentally cursed myself even as I buttoned my shirt. This was a business meeting, not a date. Why was I even thinking this way? Saturday evening arrived with ruthless punctuality. My stomach knotted as I navigated the winding roads that led to James Carter's private estate, nestled discreetly in a lush upscale suburb. Pulling up to the gated driveway, I took a steadying breath. Everything would be fine. Professional. Controlled. I repeated the words silently, hoping they'd anchor me against the swirling mix of nerves and anticipation. James opened the front door himself, his warm smile immediately disarming me. He was casually dressed, an open-collared shirt revealing just enough of his tanned skin to make me momentarily forget how to breathe. "Adam," he greeted warmly, his voice smooth and inviting. "Glad you could come. Please, come in." I stepped into his home, heart thumping painfully loud. The interior was sophisticated but welcoming, the soft lighting adding an intimate glow that heightened my unease. "Thanks again for inviting me," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He closed the door gently, eyes briefly locking onto mine. "I appreciate you taking the time," he said softly. "I trust your perspective more than anyone else's." A thrill surged through me at his words, dangerous, and exhilarating. I reminded myself firmly, it's professional. But the look in his eyes was making that line blur dangerously already, and the evening had barely begun. The moment I stepped inside James Carter's home, it felt like I'd crossed an invisible boundary. The space was as effortlessly stylish as its owner. Modern furniture, tasteful artwork on the walls, muted tones that exuded a quiet sophistication. The scent of fresh coffee and something faintly sweet lingered in the air. This was his world, his sanctuary, and the realization sent a jolt through me. Here I was, standing on his territory, feeling dangerously close to something forbidden. "Make yourself comfortable," James said, gesturing toward the expansive living room. His voice was gentle, a warm undertone that made my stomach twist, pleasantly. "I'll get us something to drink." "Thanks," I replied, taking a seat on the plush sofa. I watched him walk toward the kitchen, noticing his relaxed attire. A soft, charcoal-gray sweater over fitted dark jeans. I'd seen him countless times at the office, always impeccably dressed in sharp suits. But tonight, his casual clothes gave him a vulnerability, a subtle intimacy I hadn't expected. It made him seem approachable, almost within reach, and that was precisely what made this dangerous. When James returned carrying 2 mugs of coffee, I quickly composed myself, hoping my thoughts weren't plainly visible on my face. "You have a beautiful home," I said, accepting the steaming mug gratefully, fingers brushing lightly against his for a brief, electrifying moment. I quickly retracted my hand, heat rising to my cheeks. "Thanks. I don't often invite people here," he said casually, settling down beside me, not too close, but not comfortably distant either. But this seemed like a conversation best had somewhere private. His words hung between us, weighted with an implication I wasn't sure I fully understood yet. I took a quick sip, hoping the heat of the coffee could distract me from my escalating nerves. "Private?" I echoed carefully. "That sounds serious." James leaned back comfortably, one arm resting casually across the back of the sofa. "Not exactly serious. More personal, perhaps." My heart skipped a beat, and I felt suddenly trapped between curiosity and caution. Was he flirting with me, or was I imagining it? The ambiguity made everything feel charged. He must have sensed my confusion because he quickly shifted, a gentle laugh breaking the tension. "Sorry, I probably made that sound more dramatic than necessary. It's just a sensitive project, something close to my heart." I nodded, slightly relieved but still cautious. "I'm honored you'd trust me with something like that." James studied me quietly for a moment, his gaze deep and unwavering. "You're one of the few people whose judgment I genuinely value. Your instincts are usually spot on." "Usually?" I teased gently, surprising myself with the playful note in my voice. He laughed, eyes sparkling warmly. "Well, nobody's perfect, but you come close." His words hung in the air, and I felt the heat returning to my face. James's gaze lingered, openly appreciative, before he cleared his throat and stood, breaking the spell. "Let's move to the study," he said, offering a reassuring smile. "We can talk more comfortably there." The study was intimate, lit by soft amber lamps, shelves lined with books and framed photos. His private space felt inviting but undeniably personal, amplifying my awareness of our proximity. As we settled into the comfortable leather chairs, I noticed how his sweater hugged his frame, emphasizing broad shoulders and the subtle definition of muscle. It was becoming increasingly difficult to focus. James opened a folder, spreading several documents on the table between us, instantly shifting back to a professional demeanor. "We're launching a new initiative focused on social outreach," he began, voice steady and clear, though his eyes occasionally flicked upward, catching mine. "It's ambitious, deeply personal, and I'm nervous about getting it right." "Why nervous?" I asked gently, genuinely curious. James Carter didn't strike me as someone easily rattled. He hesitated slightly, smiling softly as he leaned in just a little closer. "Because it means something to me beyond business. It's about giving back, being vulnerable, genuine." Our eyes met, holding each other's gaze a fraction too long. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, charged with unspoken tension. "I admire that," I murmured softly. Not many leaders show that kind of sincerity. His expression softened, gaze intensifying. Maybe it's because I've spent too long hiding behind a mask. My breath caught. Was he still talking about the project? Or was this about something more personal? About him? About us? His eyes dropped to my lips briefly before returning to meet mine. The movement subtle but unmistakable. My pulse thundered, loud enough that I feared he might hear it. "I think," he said softly, voice lowered, intimate. "It's important to reveal our true selves sometimes. Life's too short not to." My mind raced. Was he inviting me to respond in kind, to step beyond our professional masks and reveal the attraction I'd kept hidden? Or was I simply projecting my desires onto a harmless moment? I swallowed hard, forcing a calmness I didn't truly feel, as I whispered back, voice carefully neutral. "I agree. Authenticity matters." Yet even as I spoke, I knew that tonight was about far more than business, whether either of us was ready to admit it or not. Dinner was simple yet elegant: grilled salmon, crisp salad, and fresh-baked bread. James led me into the dining area adjoining the study, where a small round table was set for two, illuminated by soft golden lighting. He uncorked a bottle of white wine with practiced ease, the gentle pop of the cork sounding oddly loud in the quiet intimacy of the room. "Hope you don't mind a casual dinner," he said, pouring the pale liquid into my glass. "I'm not great at cooking anything elaborate." "This looks amazing," I replied honestly, smiling softly as I raised my glass. "Besides, casual is perfect." He returned my smile warmly, raising his glass to gently clink against mine. "To authenticity," he murmured, eyes holding mine a heartbeat longer than necessary. "To authenticity," I echoed softly, feeling a pleasant heat spread through me, not entirely from the wine. As we ate, the conversation flowed effortlessly, the formal edge slowly dissolving into something comfortable and easy. James talked about his journey to success, revealing snippets of personal stories I'd never imagined hearing from the usually reserved man. It surprised me how openly he spoke now, allowing glimpses of vulnerability to slip through his carefully maintained armor. "You know," he said quietly after a thoughtful pause, swirling his wine slowly, eyes fixed on the gentle motion, "people assume that being in charge means having everything figured out. They see confidence, authority, success. But beneath all that," he glanced up, catching my gaze directly, "it can feel incredibly lonely." The openness in his voice took my breath away. I'd never expected this from James Carter. Powerful, untouchable, seemingly immune to ordinary struggles. "Lonely?" I asked softly, encouraging him to continue. He nodded slowly, a distant sadness flickering briefly in his eyes. "When everyone expects you to be strong and flawless, it becomes impossible to admit you're human, that you have doubts, fears, emotions. I spend most of my days behind a mask. Sometimes I wonder if anyone truly sees who I am." "I think I see you," I whispered before I could stop myself, heart thudding against my ribs. My voice was softer than I'd intended, revealing more than I'd planned. But his words had stirred something deep within me. James's gaze sharpened, intense, searching my face. "Do you?" I hesitated briefly, fear and excitement mingling wildly within me. "I see someone who cares deeply but feels misunderstood," I ventured gently. "Someone who deserves to let his guard down, even if just for a moment." He smiled, a small, genuine, almost shy expression. "Maybe you're right. Maybe that's why tonight feels different." "Different how?" I asked, pulse quickening at his words. James studied me carefully, eyes filled with unspoken emotion. "It's the first time in years I've let myself be this honest with anyone." The quiet intimacy of the moment was overwhelming, each word drawing us closer to a line I wasn't sure we could or should cross. I lifted my wine glass, desperately seeking something to do with my hands, needing a distraction from the intensity of his stare. James reached across the table at the same time, intending to refill our glasses, his fingers brushing lightly against mine as he took hold of my glass. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent a surge of electricity shooting up my spine, igniting every nerve. Our eyes met instantly, both frozen, suspended in the unexpected intimacy of the touch. "Sorry," he murmured quietly, voice low and husky, though he didn't immediately pull his hand away. "It's okay," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. My heartbeat hammered in my ears, heat creeping along my skin as the space between us shrank impossibly close. James withdrew his hand slowly, lingering briefly enough to send my heart racing even faster. He cleared his throat gently, visibly, attempting to regain his composure, yet his gaze stayed on mine, openly vulnerable, questioning. Internally, I struggled, my mind a storm of conflicting emotions. Was I misreading this moment? Imagining something that wasn't there? Yet, the warmth lingering where his fingers touched told me otherwise. James's eyes softened, sensing my internal conflict. "Adam, if this feels inappropriate..." "No," I interrupted gently, my voice firm yet shaky. "It doesn't feel inappropriate. It just feels complicated." A slow, understanding smile crossed his lips. "Life usually is." We both laughed softly, the tension momentarily easing but not dissipating. His gaze was gentle yet intense, searching my eyes with a clarity that made my pulse quicken. "Do you regret coming here tonight?" he asked softly, his tone sincere and open, revealing his own uncertainty. "Not at all," I whispered honestly. "But I didn't expect..." "Neither did I," he confessed quietly, expression thoughtful, almost cautious. "But maybe it's time we stopped pretending." My heart stuttered, pulse quickening as his words settled over me. The line between professional and personal was blurring rapidly, the carefully constructed walls crumbling with each passing second. I took a deep breath, summoning courage from a place deep within. "Maybe you're right." His smile deepened, warm and full of promise, as the silence stretched between us, charged with possibilities neither of us could yet fully admit. Dinner plates had been cleared, the wine glasses refilled once more, but neither of us made a move to end the evening. The study lights were dimmed now, casting soft amber glows across the bookshelves and walls. Outside the window, night had fallen completely. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, but inside James Carter's home, time had slowed to something quieter, something heavier. We'd long abandoned the pretense of discussing work. The project folder still lay unopened on the side table, forgotten. Our conversation had wandered through childhood memories, favorite books, awkward high school stories, and even the last time either of us cried in a movie. At some point, James had moved from his armchair to sit beside me on the small couch, and I hadn't questioned it. We weren't touching, but the space between us was barely a breath. The air felt dense, every laugh, every glance, laced with something deeper, something just beneath the surface. "You know," he said suddenly, his voice softer than before, almost reflective. "I used to think connection was something I had to sacrifice for success. That love, or whatever you want to call it, was a distraction." I turned my head, watching him carefully. His posture was relaxed, but his fingers fidgeted slightly with the rim of his glass, a nervous habit I'd never seen from him before. "But, lately," he continued, staring ahead at nothing in particular, "I've started to realize the loneliness you bury eventually finds a way to the surface, no matter how strong you try to be." He looked at me then, really looked, and the weight in his gaze made my stomach flip. "Is that why you invited me here tonight?" I asked quietly. There was a pause, just enough for the question to settle like dust in the air. He didn't answer, immediately. Instead, he set his glass down, leaned back slightly, and sighed. "I told myself it was for work," he said, "that I needed your opinion, your insight, and that's true. I trust you more than almost anyone on my team." "But?" I prompted, my voice calm, coaxing. His lips twitched into a faint, almost embarrassed smile. "But that's not the full truth." Silence stretched between us, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was patient. Waiting. James turned to face me more directly, his voice suddenly more sure, more open. "I've been attracted to you for months, Adam, maybe longer. But I pushed it down because it wasn't appropriate. Because I'm your boss, and you deserve more than to be someone's poorly timed secret." My breath caught. Hearing him say it out loud, hearing the truth spoken instead of merely implied, felt like stepping out into the sunlight after standing too long in the dark. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. My brain raced with questions, feelings, and risks all at once. "I noticed the way you looked at me sometimes," I said finally, my voice steady but quiet. "I just always assumed it was in my head, that I was projecting. You weren't," he said gently. "But I couldn't be the one to cross that line. It had to be your choice, if it was ever even something you wanted." I studied him for a moment. There was no smugness in his face, no arrogance, only sincerity and a quiet vulnerability that made me ache. "I don't know what I want," I admitted. "Part of me is terrified. This could get messy. People talk. Power dynamics, my reputation, yours." "I know," he said, nodding slowly. "That's why I've stayed silent for so long." I looked down at my hands, trying to gather my thoughts. "But then there's this other part of me that feels drawn to you. Always has. Not because you're successful or powerful, but because of the way you listen when no one else does. Because of the way you carry the weight of everything, without showing it. Because under all of it, I think there's someone kind and lonely." He didn't say anything, just reached over, slowly, cautiously, and placed his hand lightly over mine. His touch was warm, grounding, and I didn't pull away. "I'm not asking for anything," he said softly. "I just needed you to know." My fingers curled slightly beneath his, not holding, but not retreating either. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded, his expression unreadable, but his hand stayed on mine. The room felt impossibly still. The only sound the faint hum of the city beyond the window and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Nothing more needed to be said. There was no kiss, no dramatic profession of love. Just two men, sitting together, in quiet acknowledgement of something real and complicated. The line between us had blurred, yes, but it hadn't vanished. Not yet. The moment his hand touched mine, I knew I was in trouble. Not because it was wrong, not in any glaring moral sense, but because it felt like the kind of moment that changed things, quietly, irrevocably, one that couldn't be taken back or easily forgotten, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I gently slipped my hand out from under his, not to reject him, but to catch my breath, to clear my head. "I should probably go," I said softly, avoiding his eyes. He hesitated, then nodded. "I understand." He didn't try to stop me, didn't push, didn't plead. He just sat there, watching me stand, his expression calm but undeniably shadowed by disappointment. It only made it harder. I grabbed my jacket from the armrest where I'd left it earlier. My hands trembled slightly as I slipped it on. Part of me was screaming to stay, to lean in, to let the evening take its natural course. But another part, the more cautious one, the one that had helped me build my career brick by careful brick, pulled me back. He followed me to the front door. We didn't speak. The silence between us had shifted now, not tense or awkward, but weighty, expectant, like the air before a storm. At the door, I turned to face him one last time. "Tonight meant a lot," I said, meaning every word. "Even if I don't know what to do with it yet." James offered a small, lopsided smile. "You don't have to decide anything tonight." I didn't expect any of this. I didn't either. We stood there for a long second, eyes locked. The house was quiet behind us, and the hallway light cast a soft glow between our shadows. It felt like we were standing on the edge of something, waiting to fall, but not quite jumping. "I guess I'll see you Monday," I added, trying to inject some normalcy into the moment. But James didn't respond with his usual charm or easy humor. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, Monday." It felt cold. Not intentionally, but in that awkward way people retreat when emotions get too close to the surface. I hated it. Without thinking, I stepped forward to give him a quick goodbye hug. Something simple, something polite, but the moment I wrapped my arms around him, everything changed. His arms came around me too, but slower, firmer, like he wasn't just saying goodbye, like he was memorizing the shape of me. My face was buried near his neck, and I could feel his breath shift, then still. And suddenly the hug wasn't casual at all. I pulled back slightly, intending to end it before I lost control. But he looked at me. Really looked. And something in both of us snapped. It happened fast. I don't even know who leaned in first. 1 second we were close. The next our lips met in a kiss that was as brief as it was electric. It wasn't soft or hesitant. It was urgent, like both of us had been holding something back for far too long and finally let it break through the surface. When we pulled apart, breathless, everything was still. He looked stunned. I probably did too. Neither of us spoke. What could we say? We just stood there, staring at each other in the dim light, the taste of something new and dangerous still lingering on our lips. I started, but the words failed me. "It's okay," he said quietly, voice rough around the edges. "You can still leave." And I did. Because as much as I wanted to stay, I needed time. But as I stepped out into the night, my heart still pounding, I knew nothing would be the same again. Not Monday. Not us. Not me. Sunday morning came with too much silence and too little clarity. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, replaying every moment from the night before. The dinner, the conversation, the touch of his hand, the kiss. Especially the kiss. It had been brief, impulsive, maybe even reckless. But it had said everything we hadn't dared put into words. And now, the weight of reality had returned, pressing against my chest like something I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about feelings. It was about my career, my reputation. James wasn't just a man I was drawn to. He was my boss. The person whose name sat at the top of every email chain, whose decisions shaped entire departments. The line we'd crossed wasn't just personal. It was professional, messy, complicated. I knew what people would say. That I was foolish, reckless, naive. That nothing good could come from something born in shadows. And yet, what I'd felt wasn't nothing. That kiss, however fleeting, had been real. By early afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text. My stomach turned before I even unlocked the screen. "Hey, I just wanted to say I'm sorry if I crossed any lines last night. I never meant to make things harder for you. If it's easier to forget it happened, I'll respect that completely. No pressure. No awkwardness. Just whatever you need it to be." I stared at the words for a long time. My heart ached at the thought of pretending nothing had happened, of going back to normal like the moment we shared had been some mistake. But I also understood what he was offering. A way out. A door back to safety. To the boundaries we'd carefully maintained for so long. I typed, erased, retyped, then closed the phone and set it aside. I wasn't ready to respond. Not yet. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me longed for the clean lines of professionalism, the security of the path I'd built. But another part, the part still humming from the way his hand had lingered on mine, was tired of pretending. Maybe love wasn't supposed to be easy. Maybe it never showed up at the right time. Maybe it walked into the room in the form of your boss on a Saturday night, holding out a glass of wine and a piece of himself he'd never shown anyone else. I stood by my window, watching the wind stir the trees below, and whispered to no one in particular. What if this is the one thing I don't want to walk away from? There was no answer, no grand revelation, just a flicker of warmth in my chest that hadn't been there the day before. I didn't know where this would lead. I didn't even know if I was brave enough to take the next step. But I knew one thing. Some lines aren't meant to be erased. Some are meant to be crossed, and maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning.